Usama is, as well as a theologian, he's also a scientist, and he's probably one of the first British Muslim scientists to say he believes in evolution. And not only that, but he believes evolution is compatible with his religious beliefs. So what we're going to do now is quickly bring Usama in for 5 minutes to explain what happened when he tried to articulate that idea, and then I'll describe this in evolution.
You're thinking you couldn't actually hear by the way.
Thanks, Ghaffar, and thank you. It's an honour to speak here today. So as Ghaffar said, I'll tell you a bit about what happened then, what happened next, should I say. But before that, very brief introduction. Like many of us, Quilliam, I was a committed political Islamist for 20 years of my life. You know, I gave it to that cause. I went off to fight in Afghanistan, trained with the Mujahideen. One of the reasons I started moving away from that was seeing the civil war, 92 to 96, amongst the Mujahideen groups in Afghanistan. But I also tried to be a devout Muslim. I've served as an imam, leading prayers at the mosque for over 30 years. And at my particular mosque in East London, I had served for over 25 years. Started very young, leading the prayers. I also served as vice chairman and a trustee for 10 to 12 years. You know, teaching the Quran and the Islamic scriptures for a long time. Now, as a scientist, I also became involved in the religion and science kind of discussions for the last 10 or 15 years, because obviously science does ask serious questions of religion and religious belief. So I try to grapple with that. Now, like most contemporary contemporary Muslims, the idea of creationism is very strong. The idea that evolution and Darwinism is somehow fundamentally wrong. It's an atheist plot. It's a Jewish conspiracy. You hear people saying Darwin was Jewish. You know, I was kind of brought up with that idea that we can't accept this. And it's all based on the understanding of the Adam and Eve story that they were somehow sent to earth from heaven. So they appeared fully formed on earth, the first humans. I mean, it's based on that, a very literalist reading of the Quran, which means most, unfortunately, conservative Muslims around the world still reject evolutionary theory. Now, I was brought up with that. Everybody else around me was saying the same thing. All the religious scholars are saying that. I can remember in my mosque giving a talk during Ramadan, you know, attacking Darwinism. Although I studied physics and astronomy, etc., at university at Cambridge in London. I have a PhD in artificial intelligence. I think it was actually, for me, with God's providence, that I dropped O-level biology. I knew very little biology. You see. I just got into the physics and mathematical sciences. So I never really looked into the biology of all this. Until I was forced to, basically, because of the religion and science discussions. And when I looked into it, and then I looked at the scripture and the commentary on the Quran, etc., it suddenly became fairly obvious to me that, number one, the evidence, the scientific evidence for evolution was overwhelming, and as a scientist, you know, I had to accept that, obviously. And number two, the scriptural and theological arguments against evolution were extremely poor and extremely weak. This fundamentalist misunderstanding of things. I further found out very interesting things like a friend of Darwin called John William Draper, many of you will know of, head of the American Chemical Society, an Englishman originally. And he wrote a book in the 19th century called The History of Religion and Science. And in there he refers to evolution as the Mohammedan theory of evolution of human beings from lower life forms. And he also argues in that book, he says there was a Christian uproar against evolution, and he said we should learn from the Mohammedans who developed and are comfortable with aspects of evolutionary theory. Because there were aspects of evolutionary ideas which Muslim thinkers and philosophers had come up with. You know, obviously, they hadn't done what Darwin did, was to bring all the strands together into one theory and collect all the evidence and give a unified account of evolution as we know it. But the African scholar Al-Jahiz was the first to write about common descent. And the book called Darwin's Ghosts by Rebecca something, published last year, she has a whole chapter on Al-Jahiz, because he spent a lot of time in Africa and 1,000 years ago wrote a book about different types of animals around the world. And he talked about adaptation to the environment, and he also talked about common descent. He used the examples of wolves, foxes and dogs, for example. And he said these clearly have a common ancestor. So there were Muslim thinkers and philosophers and scientists throughout history who had developed strands of evolutionary kind of thinking. And I saw all that, and I saw the various aspects, and it became obvious to me that there really wasn't a problem between evolution and Islam. And rightly or wrongly, I decided to write about that for The Guardian in 2008, September the 11th, in fact, 2008. And this time, don't forget, I was serving as an imam and leading the Friday prayers and daily prayers sometimes, and with the vice chairman of a mosque in East London. And one of the most conservative types of mosques, the kind of Salafi mosques, which have a strong link with Saudi Arabia. And looking back on it, people say to me, "Were you crazy writing that article?" But maybe I was naive, maybe I was being brave. I don't know. But I wrote the article anyway. 2008, that was published. And what happened was, slowly people started getting very unhappy at the mosque, and I would get constant kind of questions and rumours and this and that, and people in effect trying to boycott me. But I'd been deeply embedded there for 20 years. People weren't able to take it on immediately. What they did eventually was they got a fatwa from a visiting Saudi scholar. Again, it's always Saudi Arabia, but one of the very leading conservative theologians of Saudi Arabia, his name is Sheikh Saleh Sadlan. He was visiting Britain, as he often did, back in 2010, late 2010. And he was speaking at a Salafi mosque in Birmingham, Green Lane Mosque in fact, in December. And a few chaps from my own mosque travelled up to Birmingham to ask him this question publicly. They said, is somebody who believes in evolution, are they a Muslim? And secondly, are they fit to lead the prayers at a mosque? Are they fit to be an imam? And he said categorically no. Evolution is atheism and this, that and the other. It is incompatible with Islam, it goes against Islamic belief, it's heretical, and no way can a person who believes in evolution lead the prayers. So what they did was, next they set up a petition, January 2011, an anonymous petition to have me removed as trustee and imam of the mosque. Set up anonymously, it gained just over 1,000 signatures. And then the last Friday prayer that I led, which was January 2011, just over 3 years ago, they published all these leaflets saying this man believes in evolution, are you going to pray behind him, etc., etc. And they disrupted those Friday prayers. Well, eventually, I led the Friday prayers, but the attendance was a quarter of what it normally is. Normally the mosque is packed, pretty jam-packed, but loads of people were kind of scared away and told to leave and you can't pray here. They eventually led the prayers with only a quarter of the congregation. So this was a major crisis in the mosque. Now, again, with hindsight, you could say I could have done something else, but I reacted with the only way I knew, as a kind of somebody who's tried to be a seeker of truth all my life, religion and science. And I thought I should explain my theory. I've never been able to explain in great detail because the Guardian article was very brief. So I actually held a lecture at the mosque in January 2011, later in the month, 2 weeks later, to explain Islam and evolution. Now that's become a notorious lecture, but I'm actually very proud. I look back in history and say I'm very proud I did that. Perhaps one of the first people in the world ever to hold a lecture reconciling Islam and evolution in a mosque. But I did that. You'll see clips from YouTube. What happened was, my opponents came prepared. They filled the hall. At least half of them were seriously opposed. They handed out these leaflets, which included a line saying, anybody who preaches evolution must be stopped, even if it means them being killed. And what they did was they disrupted the lecture. They constantly started heckling. I had to abandon the lecture after half an hour. And then we tried to continue the Q&A and to abandon that after half an hour as well. As part of that, one of the people behind the leaflets actually came to the front, and it's all recorded, and he shouted, "You should be killed for your views." And don't forget, this is somebody who used to be a friend, because he was part of the same kind of group. He said, "You should be killed for your views." And in fact, the leaflet itself laid out three major charges of heresy against me, and said, quoted another Saudi scholar, saying anybody who believes this stuff should be killed for their views. Now I showed that to one of the top lawyers in this country, and they said this was a clear incitement to murder. They added a footnote saying, don't take the law into your own hands. But the lawyer said this footnote wasn't anywhere near strong enough. It's a fig leaf. They said the leaflet was a clear incitement to murder, and it was handed out. And then the chap did a YouTube video, which is still there, by the way. If you type in my name, that video comes in as number 2 or 3 video, saying I should be killed for my views. I did report it to the police. Other people did also. 18 months later, the CPS wrote to me saying, we're not pressing charges. And so that young man, who I know, by the way, happens to be a jihadist, a militant jihadist, is quite free to carry on doing this in London. But that's what happened at the mosque. Eventually I was forced out of the mosque. My position just became untenable, so I resigned after a 2-year battle. And in fact, the group behind that whole business, they took over the entire mosque, changed the locks, and even forced out my own father, who was the founder of the mosque, and is the most senior scholar of that type in his generation. So that's what happened since 2011. I had to have police protection as well, by the way. I mean, I'm married with 4 young children. And I wasn't so worried about myself because I've been in Afghanistan twice in a war situation, you know, I hope I can live with that. But you worry about a petrol bomb or arson attack with your wife and 4 young children at home. So we had extra security put in and police alarm and this and that for a year or two. Things have calmed down a little bit, especially after some encouraging signs. As Ghaffar was saying, it's not all doom and gloom. So there was a major debate took place in London at the University what's it called? University Institute of Education, University of London. Was that last year? Yeah, January 2013. On evolution, it was called. Have Muslims Misunderstood Evolution? And I was one of the main speakers there. There was another pseudo-theologian there who said, just based on his reading of the Quran, human evolution can't be true. But to support my position, there were 2 Muslim professors of biology from the United States. One was a professor of microevolution, and the other one was a professor of human evolution. And they both presented all the scientific arguments, and they're both devout practicing Muslim, who said, you know, there's no problem with all of this evolution. So you'll find that debate if you're interested on YouTube. You'll also find snippets from my lecture 3 years ago from the mosque, where you will hear people saying kill him and all this kind of stuff. So it's been a fun, last 5 or 6 years. But there we are. Thank you very much.